Hey, today we're going to take a quick look at the basics of setting up and working with materials in Corona for C4D. This is February in 2017, so I'm still working with Alpha 6. There may be slight changes to the interface before we reach the final, but this will get you started and up and running today. I'm using Mastering CGI's shader ball as my object in the scene. Everything's illuminated just with one HDRI applied to a sky. There is a Corona sun, but I've disabled it for this. And so let's dive in. The first thing to ask yourself is which category the material falls into, as that will affect which parameters you set up. So quick and easy categories are opaque dielectrics, solid, regular solid objects, surfaces such as wood, concrete, stone, etc. Transparent dielectrics and liquids like water or glass, and lastly there are metals. So let's begin by taking a look at setting up a solid. We'll set up a wood. So clearly the first step is to load up a convincing texture into the diffuse. I'm just going to grab one here. And I'm only using 5 passes for rendering. I'm not looking for great quality, I'm just looking for a quick preview. So here we are with the diffuse setup. And the next thing we need to add for any sort of solid is a reflection. And let's take a look at how to set that up. Initially, when you load it in, you will of course end up with something that looks like a highly polished surface. Now, for controlling the materials, you can leave level at 100 and leave color at white. And all you really need to control things are the Fresnel IOR and the glossiness. The Fresnel controls the strength of reflection depending on the angle. So at surfaces facing back towards the camera, the reflection is actually slightly weaker than at grazing angles along the edges here, which is where the ray from the camera will reflect forward into the scene. In case you're not familiar with Fresnel IOR, if you lower it, that darkening in the center will grow more pronounced. And you can see this here as I bring it down to a really low value. There's no reflection here, but there's very high reflection still at the edges. And this is a real world effect. You can go and observe it for yourself. Generally, a good default is just 1.6. Somewhere between 1.5 and 1.6 for virtually every type of solid is ideal. The control for how strong the reflection is all comes from the glossiness. Glossiness, of course, as you lower it, you'll see the reflection gets blurrier. And once you get down to really low values, it doesn't really look so much like a reflection at all. And the best way to control that is via a glossiness map. And I'm going to grab a specular map here and load it in. And you'll see instantly that changes how that looks. And I can render that, and we have pretty good matte wood. And if you want more control over this, as you can see here, it's not a very contrasty image. What we can do is just swap this over to a filter. And if we go in here, we can see it's not much difference between the light and dark. So we could begin to exaggerate the effect some. And if I re-render, we'll have areas where the reflection is sharper and areas where the reflection is blurrier. Which will be controlled by the grain of the wood. And let's just make that a little clearer by turning off the diffuse channel. And you can see that that structure is there in the reflections. And of course you could affect it further with adjustments here in the filter to change that effect. And you could indeed load your color map and desaturate it if you don't have a glossiness map available. That would be possible too. And you can see just by using the filter we can change how this all works. And let's just pop the diffuse back on. And of course for this we could, and for most materials you can add a bump map of course too, if you like. I'm not going to do that here, we're just going to focus on the main properties in terms of how the material handles light. So that would be a basic wood. Let's try setting up a basic concrete. Oh, in fact, before we do that, I should say you do have artistic control by adjusting the Fresnel. If I raise this, we will reduce that effect and the reflections will become stronger across the whole surface. And I can re-render with that. So the reflection is getting more intense, and the value, of course, can go quite high. And because our glossiness is actually quite low in this image, it because of reflection across, a fairly even reflection across the whole surface. Let's see if we can tweak that some. We could raise it up, and as we make it brighter, we will of course have, because this is way too intense for wood, we will of course have a much sharper and shinier reflection. So let's head back in here and bring our Fresnel value down to something more in the range we would expect. So yeah, I can raise this up from the 1.6 to get a stronger effect from the reflection. And the higher I raise that, the stronger the effect will be. Or indeed, I can dampen it down again. And this really is your primary control for that. So the glossiness and the Fresnel IOR are the two you would use to control your reflection. And really, you don't need to pay attention to level or color. Okay, let's go ahead and set this back to 1.6 and have a look at creating a concrete material. So I've headed back to the default scene. I've adjusted the sky just a little. One thing I did was grab the tag and I just changed the rotation slightly just to bring the sun around a little bit more, and added a filter onto the HDR and just adjusted the gamma so there's a little bit more contrast. Just thought it might make it a little bit more interesting. So let's go ahead and create a concrete. Again, start with a diffuse texture. Just going to grab this one. And if you want to adjust the UV tiling, of course, there's always the option of just adjusting the tile UV here. Let's just set that to 1 and 1. And I think that gives us a good diffuse. And next step, of course, will be the same. Add some reflection. And principles are again the same. We are going to leave the Fresnel IOR at 1.6, and we are going to load the texture into the glossiness map. And that's a fairly light texture. I think it looks good as it is, but if you wanted to make the reflection blurrier, you could again just add a filter onto that and use that to adjust exactly how that looked. If we bring that down, then what we're going to get is the reflection will be blurrier, it won't be as sharp at certain places. We can also just remove all the saturation. Other way around, if we make it brighter, we'll get a shinier surface. And again, we can play with the contrast to adjust the difference between the light and dark. Let's leave it at that. One thing a texture like this really would benefit from, of course, is a bump map. So let's just go ahead and load it into the bump too. Let's try quite a high value and see how that comes out. And there we go. I don't think that looks too bad at all. And again, you can play with all those values and settings. I think that should probably be a bit lower. And really the only thing you need is your texture. in your diffuse, leave reflection level and color set high, final at 1.6 as default, and load in a glossiness map. And now again, your artistic control comes here. If you want to increase reflectivity, you could raise that up. And if you wanted to reduce the reflectivity, you could lower it. And of course, as you do, the reflection will only take effect at the grazing angles. If you lower that all the way down to 1, the reflection will in fact disappear altogether. It'd be the same as not having any reflection at all. And if you set it to 1.01, you'll get reflections only at the outer edge. I can demonstrate that if I turn those off and re-render it. Maybe too low. Yeah, we can't. You can maybe just let's bring it up a little bit more till we start to see the effect at the edge. And pretty much every material has some reflections, particularly at grazing angles. So that's how you would control that to match the look of any material you're going for. This is the value you would tweak along with tweaking the glossiness. And that's basically how you would work with opaque dielectrics. So let's move on. We'll have a look at transparent dielectrics next, things like glass and liquid. So here we are back to the default. Let's go ahead and make a transparent dielectric. For that, we need to disable diffuse and enable refraction. And the important value here is the index of refraction. And one thing you can do is search online. You'll find various handy tables like this one that give you the index of refraction for various temperatures of water here, for example. 1.33 is a good default. For glass, different types of glass, 1.52 is a pretty good default, and that is the default for the index of refraction. If you're not familiar with it, the lower this value, the less the material will bend what is seen through it. So as I bring that down, you'll see that checkerboard gets less and less distorted, all the way down to 1, where it doesn't distort it at all, and the higher value, the more that background gets distorted. So 1.52, we'll start with glass, and you'll need reflection too, and the final IOR should match. So let's do a quick render, and this is a basic glass material, just like so. If we wanted to change that into something like water, we saw the value is like 1.33. Again, make sure it matches in both. And now we have something that's a bit more like water. Couple of extra options to note down here. If you enable caustics, it will slow down your render time. That will basically allow light from light sources to be bent passing through the material. And you'll see those areas of focused light caused by that. Definitely leave that off for most cases, unless you're dealing with a hero object with caustics. And the thin refraction is very useful for thin panes of glass, things like windows and similar that really don't show much in the way of refraction. If you check that, what happens is all that distortion gets turned off. If I just turn off the reflection, you'll see, once again, we're effectively looking at as if we'd made the refraction IOR down to 1. Very useful for thin panes of glass. Other things you can do, you can of course manipulate the glossiness. The glossiness of the refraction works the same as the reflection. The lower the value, the more blurred things appear as you look through it, so it gives you a kind of a smoked glass type effect, or a frosted glass type effect rather. And of course you can apply maps in there. We could add some scratches. That's a bit dark, it's going to cause it to be very blurred, so let's go ahead and filter that. So that doesn't have too strong an effect. While it's rendering, let's drop the map also into the reflection glossiness. And let's just render it with both of those set. And now we should have a glass that has a kind of a worn look to it. And we'll explore other things later in a separate video, issues like glass that is colored, and you will see an increase in color as you look through more and more of the material. Not going to cover that today. We're just looking at setting up the basics. So with that done, let's have a look at creating some metals. So here we are back in the default setup again, and for metals, just disable the diffuse, it doesn't have any. Enable the reflection, and the secret to metals is you just raise the Fresnel IOR to maximum. The initial material will be a perfect mirror, and you'll see there's no difference in the intensity of reflection for faces pointing back toward you versus the grazing angle. If you want to soften the look, you can add some glossiness that'll blur those reflections, give the look of like an aluminium or similar. And if you want to have a colored metal, simply adjust the color of the reflection. And that's really all there is to it. We'll explore in more detail something like an anisotropy later on. For just now, I can give you a quick example. If we just load in this brush discs, and I need to adjust the repetition here. Let's do 12 and 6. And one thing about anisotropy is it'll have no effect while glossiness is set to 1, so let's just lower it a bit and hit render, and this will give a look as if the metal had been polished in a circular pattern. Okay, let's lower the glossiness a bit more, and I'm going to bump up the number of passes to, I just raised that to 15 from the 5 I've been using. Let's hit render. And as I say, we'll delve back in later on and explore this in a bit more detail, but you can see how anisotropy can give you some very interesting results on the material. Other thing that's possible, let's just clear that out, is of course, same as before, you can use a glossiness map to add something like scratches onto the surface. This one's pretty extreme. Let's do a render on that and see how it looks. And of course our repeats are a bit too high, so let's bring those back down. And really, that's glossiness is how you would control the look of the metal, and color is how you control the color of the metal. So that's it. That's a quick look at setting up basic materials in Corona for Cinema 4D. We've gone through your standard solid dielectrics, we've gone through your transparent dielectrics like glass and water, and we've gone through setting up metals. We'll have more in-depth tutorials on certain specific features like subsurface scattering, volumetric absorption later on, but this should get you started with 90% of the materials you'll be using in your scene. Thanks for watching.